Hey there, welcome back to another Wednesday Night Live. We are so excited to jump into this week's video together, so buckle up, it's gonna be a ride.
Well, welcome once again to our final Readers Theater of Pomona Christian Church. It has been such a wonderful journey these past few weeks, looking at all these great Bible stories together. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. We have a great one for you this week, and one of my personal favorite stories. This is the story of David being anointed by Samuel. Let me read it to you today. The Lord said to Samuel, "How long will you mourn for Saul, since I have rejected him as king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and be on your way. I am sending you to Jesse of Bethlehem. I have chosen one of his sons to be king." But Samuel said, "How can I go? Saul will hear about it and will kill me." The Lord said, "Take a heifer with you and say, 'I have come to sacrifice to the Lord.' Invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you what to do. You are to anoint for me the one I indicate." Samuel did what the Lord said, and when he arrived at Bethlehem, the elders of the town trembled when they met him. They asked, "Do you come in peace?" Samuel replied, "Yes, in peace. I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Consecrate yourselves and come to the sacrifice with me." Then he consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. When they arrived, Samuel saw Eliab and thought, "Surely the Lord's anointed stands here before the Lord." But the Lord said to Samuel, "Do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him. The Lord does not look at the things man looks at. Man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." Then Jesse called Abinadab and had him pass in front of Samuel. But Samuel said, "The Lord has not chosen this one either." Jesse then had Shammah pass by. But Samuel said, "Nor has the Lord chosen this one." Jesse had 7 of his sons pass before Samuel. But Samuel said to him, "The Lord has not chosen any of these." So he asked Jesse, "Are these all the sons that you have?" "They're still the youngest," Jesse answered, "but he is tending the sheep." Samuel said, "Send for him. We will not sit down until he arrives." So he went and had him brought in. He was ruddy with a fine appearance and handsome features. Then the Lord said, "Rise and anoint him. He is the one." So Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers. And from that day on, the Spirit of the Lord came upon David in power. And Samuel went on to Ramah. What an amazing story. One of my favorites, as it talks about how God looks at the heart and not on the outward appearance. Take that with you this week. And again, this has been Pomona Christian's Readers Theater.
Hey Pomona family, it's time for the very last wild adventure with Taylor and Veronica.
Yeah, we know that you're probably in tears right now. They could be tears of joy or tears of sorrow. And actually, we have a little bit of both. I know that the season of online is ending, which actually makes me happy because then we'll get to see you face to face.
So today's story is about David. Tate, Hayes, and Lena have some questions for Marcus.
Thank you guys for joining us on each of our wild adventures. We're gonna miss you guys. Marcus this week.
How old was David when he got
Anointed.
What does the name Elab mean?
What did King Saul do to get dethroned in God's eyes?
Great questions.
3, 2, 1.
Computers use little bits of information called, it's a something processor. It's the name of a pass. Sean is my
Son.
a boy is not a girl. He's really going, he has a lot of
Enthusiasm.
to get things done. He wants to succeed.
Gumption.
It's very okay. This fruit comes from Florida.
Oranges.
A class in school that deals with chemicals.
Chemistry.
The opposite of life is
Death.
it's a 3-to-1 blank that you
Score?
succeed. No,
A 3-to-1 chance.
no, another word. Pass.
5,
Here's my blank.
4,
Heart. Yep.
3.
And we will be we are the
Champion.
Yeah. Boom.
Yes.
All right.
2, 1.
Breakfast, lunch, dinner,
Meals.
supper. The thing that flows through your body, the red
Blood.
stuff. The brown stuff on the ground.
Dirt.
When you write your name.
Scribble. Your signature.
Yeah. A place that you stay when you go on like vacation.
Hotel. Motel.
Corona.
Virus.
A meal, one of them that I said, not lunch, but
Brunch.
no. The one you eat the third meal.
Dinner, supper.
Yeah. Something that you can eat during those meals. It has pepperoni on it or
Pizza.
cheese. A book, but another word for that. You read it.
A novel.
No, or you can tell it. Like you can tell
story?
a phone.
Call.
But another word for
Phone interview.
The
phone.
the
5.
the person who
3.
is in a car and they go like this.
The driver,
I can't do that. I can't do that. Can I? Doesn't count.
Well, good evening. We are at the lesson portion, and we're going to look at an aspect of David's life. In this lesson, that is David fighting Goliath, and that's one of my favorite accounts in Scripture, and I know for many it's one of theirs as well. It's one of the best known accounts. So we're going to look at that, but the kids had some questions, and I'm going to answer them first. So the first question was, how old was David when he was anointed? And most would say around 15, and that was the thought I first had when the question was asked, but I try to research these to make sure I get them right. And some, they date that because of the age he becomes king at 30, and they put the dates back, try to figure out how old he was in that chapter. But also they say he could have been as young as 10. And so David is very, very young, and that also explains why they didn't even think about him being the one who was going to become king of Israel, because he was so young. So you can picture, even if he was 10 at that age, God knew who he would be. But you can see why they didn't even think about him. That he was out in the field taking care of the sheep, and we also know he wasn't old enough to go into battle with his brothers, because as we'll see in this next chapter, the only reason he sees Goliath is because he is bringing food to his brothers. So he was very young when he was anointed. Another question somebody had was, what does Eliab's name mean? Eliab is David's oldest brother. He's the one they thought looked like the king, or would be a good king, but that's not the one that was chosen. But Eliab's name means God is my father. So when you see that L, a lot of times that means the Lord and something else. And then why was King Saul dethroned? Why was the kingdom taken from King Saul? And the main reason is God gave Saul instructions when they went into a battle to conquer someone, to destroy everything, but Saul decided to keep some things, and he had been disobedient before. And so at that point, the kingdom was taken from Saul's hands because he wasn't obedient. Saul kind of did what Saul wanted, instead of what God asked him to do. And so that is why the kingdom is taken from Saul's hand. And that's why when David is anointed, the prophet is told that the prophet Samuel is told that God is seeking a man after his own heart, and that man is David. And I think this account, when he goes to bring the food to his brothers, the armies aren't fighting because there's a champion from the Philistines that goes down to the valley every day and challenges them to one-on-one combat, and nobody will step up and fight him, and that is Goliath. And when David brings the food, he sees that's going on. And so David volunteers to go fight Goliath. And so they ask him all these questions, and he goes to King Saul. He volunteers. And this is what Saul says in verse 33 of chapter 17. You are not able to go against this Philistine and fight him. You are only a boy. He has been a fighting man from his youth. We don't know how much time has passed since he was anointed to be the future king, but there has been some time, and he's bringing them food, and he uses that word boy. You know, that's an adolescent. That's not considered a man yet. And he says, you know, kind of the word is used, you're only a youth, and he's been a fighting man from his youth. They say, you can't win because you're this young kid, and he's been a fighting man since he was a kid. It says, but David said to Saul, your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. So we're going to see some things that David does, why he goes out to fight the giant and why he volunteers. But there are two things that he says there, and we'll look at those later. Saul said to David, go, and the Lord be with you. So nobody else has volunteered, so Saul says, okay, we'll let you try it. It says, then Saul dressed David in his own tunic, and the tunic was just some clothing they would wear, just a shirt or something, cloth. Then he put a coat of armor on him and a bronze helmet on his head. So then the armor would go over and the helmet. David fastened the sword over the tunic and tried walking around in them because he was not used to them. I cannot go in these, he said, because I am not used to them. So he took them off. And what we know about Saul was very tall as well. David's a boy, so they probably don't even fit. They're awkward. It's uncomfortable. You can see him. The helmet's probably sliding around. And he just says, I can't go like this. It's not going to work. It says, then he took his staff in his hand. He chose 5 smooth stones from the stream and put them in the pouch of his shepherd's bag, and with his sling in his hand approached the Philistine. So he takes what he used to guard the sheep with. Remember, that's why he felt confident. He took a staff, which was a stick, and he got 5 stones. Now these stones weren't just little rocks. They were stones, they say, about the size of a tennis ball or a baseball. So you can imagine when one of those gets slung out of the sling, it's flying and it's very powerful. I oftentimes had pictured a small stone, but these were very good size. You know, you take a stone the size of a tennis ball and it's going to do some damage. It says, meanwhile, the Philistine with his shield bearer in front of him kept coming closer to David. He looked David over and saw that he was only a boy, ruddy and handsome, and he despised him. He said to him, am I a dog that you come at me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. Come here, he said, and I'll give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. So he's really taunting David. He sees that David doesn't even have a sword or a spear. So Goliath even has an armor bearer to, carry more armor, carry more weapons for him. And so he makes fun of David. It says, David said to the Philistine, you come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will hand you over to me, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. Today I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds of the air and the beasts of the earth. And the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands. Of course, we know they get closer and closer, and David puts the stone in his sling and swings it, and he hits Goliath, and it would have been a rope type sling, not a slingshot like we think, but a rope, and it could really make those things fly, and smacks him in the head, and he's down for the count for good. And there are two things that gave David confidence, because I've always looked at this and wondered, what kind of courage does it take to go down and to face this huge man? Well, one is he looked at his past experience, how God had been faithful. He'd fought the lion and a bear, and he realizes if he's fought a lion and a bear and God has protected him then, that God can protect him from Goliath. I also think he knows that he's been anointed, that God has a plan for him. So he's willing to step up here and lead. It's also interesting that Saul is the king, and he is also one of the tallest Israelites, but he is not going out to face Goliath. And so he sends this little boy in his place, and interestingly enough, it's the one who will take his place. You know, he puts on Saul's armor and he takes it off. And that's almost symbolic of, you know, he's not going to be like Saul. He's going to trust in God. And so he trusts in God, but also he realizes that they've defied God, that they have mocked God. And so with his past experience, and then also he's not going out there for himself, he's going out there for God because they have ridiculed God and made fun of God, then he goes out into battle to face Goliath and wins. And so that's something we can always use when we face tough circumstances, we face challenging times, is to look back at God's faithfulness and do what we do for Him. And that's what I think it is to be like David, you know, in those things, is to look at how God has been faithful in the past and to look at what we do. Whatever we do, we're doing for Him. Have a good night.
Thanks so much for tuning in to another Wednesday Night Live. We are having a blast getting to join you each Wednesday online as a church family and community.